Can the recording?
Okay, cool. So I'd like to thank everyone for what was an interesting debate. I'm going to start with one general point of feedback that doesn't necessarily have to do with the rankings, but I think could help everyone in future debates. Then I'm going to give the rankings, the rationale behind them, and due to not having a lot of time, then simply I'll give personal feedback to whoever wants to, but that would not be recorded. Okay, so point of general feedback. So I think that all of the arguments that were presented are somewhat linked to the idea of tenure, but often they are not linked enough, in the sense of, if you want to talk about why things change, show me exactly why tenure is the thing that makes the difference. And here, I would also like you to show me what exactly changed and why it matters in a comparative way. In the sense that when you talk about things like incentives or when you talk about good research and so on, you also need to address the fact that there might be other incentives or there might be other things for us to consider, since human beings don't only operate as I have one input, one output, but show me why you think that the incentives are stronger on your side, etc. Actually, I have a second point of general feedback as well, which is another comparison that was lacking in teams, which I think could have helped us make an easier decision, and that is the question of where do we get generally better academia and according to what criteria? In the sense that we are given different means in which the academic world is going to change, which is how many people are going to leave or stay, what is going to be the nature of research, what are going to be the motivations for research. Now, all of those are definitely relevant, but notice that no team actually shows what is more important for us to look in academia, or what creates a better world overall, and not just effects that we might have that might occur, yes or no. So I think a team that would even take the hit on certain aspects, but then really analyze why they think that generally we get more benefits than drawbacks, or vice versa, is a team that is going to help us decide on that more. I think there were attempts to do that, but never were they proven more than a line of assertion to which we couldn't credit enough. So that's on that. Eventually, the rankings and the rationale behind them. So we saw this debate as a short diagonal in which we had quite a long discussion between the teams there, but eventually we came to the decision in which the closing government takes the first, then the second goes to the opening opposition, then the third goes to the closing opposition, and the fourth, unfortunately, goes to the opening government. So what are the reasons for that? We'll start from the bottom up. So, opening government. The bulk of your case is presenting certain problems that might arise from having tenure. However, notice that your case often lacks in why the canceling of academia is going to create a change for the better. So you show us problems, but never why you think that they are going to be solved in the day after. Moreover, you do show us certain problems, but you don't show us why those problems are sufficient in order to implement the mechanism that you yourself suggest. Now, when comparing you directly to the closing opposition, what the closing opposition does is, A, they draw to a question whether the problems are that bad, in the sense that they say, well, but there are mechanisms in order to prevent bad people from actually being in a position of tenure, which you never show why the people that are old actually get to the position, and so on. B, they also say that there are other incentives that arise in the short term, and they give us an attempt to compare and show us that this is a world which is better now. We'll get to that in a second of whether you actually succeed on doing that, but I think the attempt of at least trying to say we have here a parameter which could influence why we get better academia generally, and why we also have the positive impacts that you say that arise from young people and so on, meaning that we don't lose what you think that we lose, but we might have a better world on their side, prove to us more why we shouldn't adopt this policy, and therefore they are ranked above. Then when comparing between the two teams on opposition. So closing opposition here, when we compare you to OO, the point about people who receive tenure are fine as it is not developed sufficiently better than opening opposition, in the sense that this is already something that appears in the DLO speech. And we think that you give a bit more explanations, but this is already something that is proven sufficiently in opening opposition. Then in terms of the rest of the case that you give, when you talk about the idea of the incentive in the short term versus the long term, notice here that you try to frame this as being more important than the opening opposition, in the sense that you say the race itself is the thing that makes people stay and perform better. However, notice that you don't prove why the race itself is the thing that makes the change, so you assert it a bit, but moreover, the race itself is towards the goal of having a job security, which is something that already appears in the analysis presented by the opening opposition. So it's unclear why then the race towards the thing that OO says that is the main drive and the main motivation to succeed and stay is something that we can credit you analytically to be better than them on that question. Moreover, you base a lot of your case on having the equation of we would rather have the short-term incentives rather than the long-term, and we think that this is the thing that creates a better academia. Now, while this is something that deals well with what opening government says, at this point at the debate, you do get a challenge on the long term, and whether we have unique and specific problems of people that after they get tenure are performing in a worse way. And here, never do you answer the long term, or do you explain why your prioritization is more important. Unlike the opening opposition, that does give us reasons in the long term as well as to why we think that tenure is still something that doesn't prohibit you from performing well, which they talk about the need to be desired, prestige, the conventions, the students, etc. So here, strategically, by focusing on this area, you are not helping us settle the main question at this point in the debate, unlike OO that deals more with the area that is more problematic in the analysis. Lastly, when we talk about the idea of the nature of research, you give two other types of research that we might lose on this side. Now, OO already talks about the idea that you might need time, or you might need to be creative and dream about things. Now, here, by adding more types of research, it doesn't necessarily help to fill the missing link that doesn't exist in both teams on opposition, which is the question of why does tenure prohibit necessarily those things? So you have a logical leap in tenure doesn't allow you that, but you never explain why tenure is something that doesn't allow this to happen. So we get two more impacts, but without the logic, and therefore we can't credit you much more in terms of how important it is that you add this. So then, generally speaking, OO solves, or at least tries to solve, more of the clashes in the debate. And while you add to some of the important ones, your contribution is not enough, and your attempt to then prioritize what is uniquely new is not done sufficiently. So that's the reason between the oppositions. Then between OO and CG. And here we had quite a long discussion, because when you look at the debate, you have the three clashes, and the way it goes down to teams is often by points and not by knockout. So on the first clash of whether lecturers are going to stay in academia, yes or no, this is a clash that is weighed towards the closing government. So basically, OO tells us, well, this is your only incentive and you need this in order to stay in academia. Now, already in OO's case, there is quite a tension between saying that, but they also want to stay in academia because of the unique reasons of academia, and then it's not exactly clear then how can you state that this is the only incentive that they have. But luckily we didn't have to judge only based on that tension, because you do get somewhat of an answer from CG on this clash, to which they say, well, yes, but there are other incentives as well, and the I'd say alternative of simply long-term contracts is also enough to have them stay in academia for a time that we think is sufficient. Now, it's not necessarily analyzed why is that sufficient, but I think these are answers, at least. And at least it then is mitigated to the point where we're not sure that many would actually leave academia, or many people that we want to stay in academia would leave. Therefore, CG win this clash. Then on the second clash of, well, how would then the professors work in the short and long term? Here, this is actually a clash that goes to OO, and OO win this clash. And here, this is due to the fact that OO give us many different reasons as to why there are still incentives even after you get tenure to perform really well, and why they would want to do that, and we're going to have them motivated to the point where this is enough. Now here, what CG does is they assert a bit that based on either trivial cases which you bring, meaning anecdotal cases, or an analysis that was lacking, to which you just say, well, the moment you get tenure, that's the point where you don't really care. You never really explain why your case is going to happen, meaning why the moment you get tenure, you're going to necessarily change that much. Now, you do try to say that when you say, well, generally people need negative incentives as well, but this ignores the specific explanations coming from the opening opposition on this question. So here it's not enough to say, well, generally people need this, when already specifically OO give you reasons to which you don't address. Then even if you were to prove that point, notice that you never prove to us why these are more people that function in a way that is not good. So we might accept that there are some, but it's not clear where we have more. And even if it's not a matter of quantity, then there is still the question of quality and whether this makes academia worse all in all, which once again you don't do, and you do have the burden to do that. That is why you don't do sufficiently to win over this clash, and OO wins this clash of where we get better outputs, let's say, of academia. Then there is the third clash, which is the nature of research, to which we think that CG slightly beats OO. And here the question is, OO tells us, well, there are cases of unique research that you need to have certain academic freedom and creativity and the ability to dream, yada, yada, yada. To which CG doesn't answer directly, but answer in a way that is sometimes implicit, in saying that, well, but academia also often researches bullshit, which might happen, but I'm then not sure, well, what kind of research do we get, what's more likely, and so on. So we might have amazing research that doesn't happen in the private sector, and we might have bullshit research, but once again, not clear. And then another answer, which is a bit better in terms of being directly compared, which is, well, look, we don't have to necessarily defend a situation where you as an academic are based on what you say in an exaggeration, an hourly basis, which, I mean, it's not fair, it's a straw man. But let's take your logic to that. But you are at least assessed by someone from your faculty or the president of the university, which has more information. Now, I do think that while this lacks explanation, and you could have done more to show why this is enough, why this beats OO, considering that OO doesn't have enough of an explanation themselves on why the uniqueness is so much lost because of tenure and why the way you are assessed is necessarily going to be this way, or at least more likely going to be this way after the motion, I think it is a sufficient answer considering what they tell us. And then the fact that you have an answer means that you also then weigh this clash. Now, because no one prioritizes the clashes in the debate, and we are not sure what is more important, it seems then that the team that has a 2 out of 3 clashes won in its favor at least shows us more good things happening on their side, and therefore marginally take over the opening opposition. So, questions about the rationale? Cool. Okay, so thank you very much. We'll turn off the camera, and if you want personal feedback, personal feedback.
Thanks, Mark.